struggling learners. We're talking about your children. We're talking about your kids. We're talking about the challenge that kids have in school, but some kids have chronic challenges and some kids have situational. The whole world shifted within the last year or so, and every student, every parent has said their child is struggling with some part of adapting. So this is for you. And it's especially for you. If you have a child who was struggling before COVID, before the world started shifting under everybody's feet, you're going to want to lean in. As Beth Ellen Nash takes us onto a journey to set up our struggling students, our children, our struggling learners for success. So join me in welcoming her into the studio. There you are. So here I am, and there you are. Ta-da!
Oh, thank you. So good to be here.
It is wonderful to be here with you and to see you again. I haven't seen you in a while.
Not since Thursday.
Yeah, well, that's true. Okay, so I guess it hasn't been all that long ago. It's been such an amazing journey, Beth Ellen, for so many people with their kids in this period of time. So, I mean, I know the stories that I hear, but you work with parents and teens all the time. So first, tell people who you are and why they should listen to you on this topic.
Well, I'm Beth Ellen Nash, and I am the founder of Wings to Soar Online Academy. So we've been empowering dyslexics and other outside-the-box kids for the past 10 years in online schools. So we've been doing online school since before online school was a thing.
Whoa, that was fast and furious. And so dyslexic and other outside the box?
Other outside the box learners. Like, I don't prefer to say learning disabled.
Yeah.
But kids who learn differently than the traditional system.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool.
There's an awful lot of them.
There's an awful lot of them. Okay. That's, it's comforting in a way to know that there's an awful lot of them, because that means that the ones that
you're not alone. Yeah,
they're not alone. On the other hand, it means that they're struggling. There's a lot of them.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
there's a lot of kids struggling.
How did you end up in online learning before online learning became a thing?
Well, before I was in online learning, early in my teaching career, I was doing a long-term sub, and I was just baffled over 4 kids who failed almost every test. And over the lunch table one day, I asked a colleague, what do I do? And she's like, some of them just aren't going to make it. And I didn't say anything, but inside I screamed, not on my watch, not in my classroom. Like, that is not an acceptable option. And I suspect that some of them just aren't going to make it isn't okay for you either, especially not when it's your kid. And I was just so disappointed by the bureaucratic constraints of a school system that left my hands tied to get the kids the help they need. And I had known since my first school of education class, when I wrote my philosophy of education paper, that someday I was going to need to start a school in order to personalize education the way I really believed it needed to be done. But it kind of pushed me more. And at the time I started tutoring for a few years. And, as I tutored, I started to gain a passion for struggling learners and, really gained a lot of skills and experience. After 3 years of tutoring, a couple of my clients were like, would you provide a little more structure for our homeschool program? And 6 weeks later, we had started a small school. So for 8 years, I ran a tiny brick and mortar school in Madison, Wisconsin. And by 2011, I had parents in over a dozen cities around the country, as I had spoken at homeschool conventions, saying, oh, I wish your school were here. And I realized that maybe with the power of the internet, it could be. And so I shifted online. And so instead of serving 3 to 13 kids at a time in my tiny little brick and mortar school, this ended this year with 225 kids we're serving in 40 states and 10 foreign countries. So that's kind of how that's how that journey happened.
Yeah. Okay. So hundreds of kids have gone through your school system now.
Yep.
And now it's hundreds every school year. So this power of personalization, is that really the key to setting a struggling learner up?
It really is. I mean, I truly believe that personalized education is what's needed. I mean, we believe we need to start each child where they are. We talk about their just right level. So we start kids with assessments to figure out where they are, and not just reading, but like reading comprehension and fluency and phonics and vocabulary and language and spelling, and on each of the individual skills, we need to know where they are. And so I don't see any kid, I don't believe any kid's a grade level package, Jackie. We try to say, they're the fifth grade, people ask me, so what does it look like for a fifth grader? Well, here are some possibilities of what it might look like, because we like pull from a menu of options. And like Grace isn't going to be, the program for Grace isn't the same as it is for Paula, or the same that it is for Steve. Like, it's going to be different for each of them. And I believe they need to work at their just right level in each skill area so that they can build confidence, independence, and success where they are. And it's amazing the kind of gains we can see. I mean, we see 1.5 to 3 years gains in a school year very commonly, because we start them where they can be confident and successful, instead of, so often kids are just struggling to keep their head above water. They're trying to stay afloat, and they're not making gains. They're just trying to not drown.
Boy, you said a mouthful there. I mean, when you're struggling to just keep your head above water, it's not easy to feel like you're succeeding at anything, because you're always in panic mode. It's
right. And unfortunately, I hear a lot of families who are telling me that they're considering, working with us and things to sort, because they're like, my kids, where they say, a lot of kids have really done worse this past, year of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're like, my kids actually finally not constantly comparing themselves to the next kid, because they're not seeing how they don't measure up every day. And so my kids actually finally, this online thing that we've been doing, they've been actually getting to be who they are and not having to worry about what everybody else is seeing and thinking. And, they're like, so now that that's kind of going away, we're looking for an option to keep that going for my kid. So, or kids who've been bullied in the past, where this has been like, just, it's safer to be at home for them, and they feel safer. They feel so like, yeah, I mean, I've got families who are, yes, some families are going back to their school situations this year, but I've got other families who are saying, no, actually, we want that, but we want it even better. And we want it actually tailored to our kid. So.
Got it. So there's, they say you can't do it wrong, but there are certain things you can do that make it easier for who's struggling. So let's walk people through a few things that are just basics for you, as far as if you have a kid who's struggling, where do you start?
First thing, you got to know where they are. I mean, so I think, doing, like, we have a free parent questionnaire for you that we put together, a personalized learning guide for you based on that parent questionnaire. And just even starting there, where just a parent assessment of just thinking through, and many times that parent questionnaire we send to families, it's the first time anybody's really asked them to think about all of those aspects of their learning concerns. And they're like, oh, either they're real aware of some things that they never even thought about, or, my kid isn't really struggling in everything. It's these couple specific skills that I'm really concerned about. So starting with just that kind of self-assessment, and then, if you do have more concerns, you need to figure out where their levels are and things, so we know what we need to do to help them. And whether it's with us or whether it's, some other, whatever you're going to do, if you actually know where the skill gaps and strengths relative are, you can make a plan that is going to actually meet your child for who they are and where they are. And I think that's one of the huge things that sets kids up for success. And I tell people, like, whether you're working with us or whether you're doing something else, like, this traditional system says here's the curriculum pace, we got to keep them going. And I say the curriculum needs to be your servant and your guide, not your taskmaster, because your kid needs to be what drives the pace and what drives. And we need to back down to where they are so that they can be successful. So often parents are like, well, I know they're a little behind, but I can't go that low. maybe they're a sixth grader and they've got some first grade spelling gaps and maybe some second grade phonics gaps and some third grade language skills. And they're tempted to go down to like, oh, let's just back up a little bit. I'm like, we got to go where they are, because if we don't lay that foundation, if we don't have a solid foundation, the further and further along they get, the shakier and shakier the education goes, unfortunately.
That's a big, big issue. Okay, so here's what I'm hearing from a parental point of view. I can almost just envision all the heads going into the sand. I don't want to know. Yeah, because that was really a big challenge. What if my child is lacking a foundational skill and I don't know?
Sure. And if you do know, then you also have the responsibility to do something about it. I mean, there's that balancing, there's that there as well. But I think a lot of parents this past year and a half with COVID crisis schooling have observed what their kids are struggling with in a way they never really had a vision, a glimpse into. So I think a lot more parents now are actually more aware of what's truly going on for their kid. And a lot of parents have become aware of things. It's like, I'm not sure that this is just because it was online that this is going on. I suspect there's been more. I've been being told that they're doing okay, and that they keep getting passed along. But from what I've seen this past year and a half, I'm not so convinced that they've actually been doing okay. And so there's a lot more of that nagging concern for a lot of parents because they've observed it at their kitchen table.
So where angels fear to tread is this whole conversation about, do I follow the bouncing ball and let my kid go from grade to grade when I have these basic concerns? Because that's what the establishment, that's what the school is set up for. That's what everybody else is doing. And, this is not a small conversation.
No. And considering doing something entirely different for your kid's education potentially is a big deal. Yeah. And if your kid has been slipping further and further behind, it's, do we want them struggling? Because this whole suicide prevention that we're talking about, Jackie, kids struggling in school is yet another risk factor. It just adds to the already underlying set of risk factors that are present for everybody. And, kids who struggle, unfortunately, and what breaks my heart is they see themselves as broken. And they're not broken. They're not broken. And so often, if we don't have a name for it, they assume the worst. Yeah. They assume that there's something terribly wrong with me, rather than just maybe their brains were wired for a little bit different kind of learning, and their brains set up for a different kind of excellence. And that's how I see it. I don't see it as that they're broken. They're smart, but they're wired differently. Yeah. And,
that's
grabbing hold of that.
We're going to pull this into the adulthood for a minute, because these don't go away. When kids come through school, if they were struggling in school, they often you continue to struggle. Yeah. All the way through. So let's start where everybody is. So Beth Ellen, if an adult struggled through school and now they're struggling in the workplace, how would they start where they are? What would you recommend to someone?
So part of that is just owning that you have the struggle and recognizing that, hey, this particular thing is hard for me. And there are thankfully a lot more tools and accommodations available today than there ever were. And it's normal for us to talk to our phones. It's normal for us to, hey Siri, or hey Google, or hey Alexa. And, we can get the, ask for what we need. There's audio supports. I mean, there's use speech to text, learn how to get comfortable with a tool like that. But also think about, as an adult, one, do you want to go back and fill in skill gaps that you didn't have a chance to? Because you can choose to. I mean, if you choose as an adult to say, hey, I want to embrace this, and I'm willing to go wherever I need to go, maybe there were second grade phonics skills you missed too. And you know what? Probably because when we were in school, a lot of that wasn't being taught.
Yeah, like none of it.
None very much so wasn't. And so, if that didn't come naturally to you, maybe you do want to go fill that in. Or maybe you say, you know what? I'm okay with the fact that I am a better ear reader than an eye reader. And I'm going to use audiobooks to access what I need to access, or use the assistive technology. So for some people, it's, I actually want to go back. I know a lot of parents, as they're exploring their child's learning challenges, they start thinking, I wonder if that was me too, because there is a genetic connection. I mean, there is definitely a genetic connection, and it wasn't diagnosed for the most part, in your generation, my generation, Jackie, it just wasn't. No. And so, and it was one of those, you just did the best you could and you moved on, and you didn't even talk about the fact that you struggled. It was just, school was a little hard. School was a little hard. But maybe, and sometimes for parents, it can be really, this whole exploring their kids' learning challenge brings up that stuff in themselves. And they may think, well, I pushed through, I made it through in spite of this. And sometimes they don't want to go there with their kid.
I can believe that you do a lot of hand-holding on this process.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, because honestly, we joke that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but it's true. And it's like, it's one of those things, and it's like, but we know that with our families, that if there's a very good chance one or the other of the parents has had some learning challenges. And maybe not. It may not be in the parents. It may be an aunt or uncle, or it may be the grandparent, and it didn't show up for the parents' generation. And like people who are in the skilled trades, I often, they were smart enough that they were maybe stealth learning challenges, and that they've just gone on to be wildly successful using their flip side strengths that, they developed instead of, and no one would ever know that it was a challenge. And they've probably been smart and surrounded themselves with support staff that does the parts of the job that they're not as uniquely wired for excellence in.
I'm having a good time with this because you brought up some languaging that I just am not familiar with. And it's so clear. The first one was when you said they're a better ear reader than an eye reader. And I'm like, sure. Okay, now once you said audiobooks, I knew what an ear reader was, but I've never heard it expressed that way. And what a beautiful non-judgmental way of saying, hey, you give it to me in my ears rather than have me read it.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody was blind, they would, before audiobooks were easy, you would think they would be using Braille and they'd be finger reading. I mean, they'd be finger reading.
Yeah.
Somebody else. But nowadays, lots of people use audiobooks. And it's not necessarily, for some, it's just, they wish they could sit down with a physical book, but they just don't have the time. But to be able to say, you don't have to say, I can't enjoy a book or I can't read. It's just, I prefer to read listening with my ears, and I take it in better that way. And that's okay. And I really think that's important. So I credit Ben Foss, Dyslexic Empowerment Plan, I think is the one that I credit the terminology for. But but I think it is an empowering way of thinking about it. Like, it's just a different way of reading. It's just a different way of accessing the text.
All I could think about was the Dr. Seuss book that says, I can read with my eyes shut. and how that story is now the truth. You know, we can read with our eyes shut now, whether first it was with finger reading and now it's with audiobooks. But yeah, it was really funny. That's the only thing that popped into my head. The other thing you said that caught my attention was you talked about flip side strengths. Say more about that.
Yeah, that's my term. That's the term I came up with to describe, because so often what we see is that my specialty is dyslexia. I mean, that's the realm that I work in the most, but that many dyslexics are particularly, and I think many people with learning challenges, this is true for, but my expertise is in the dyslexia area, that they tend to be exceptionally good, say, in the 3D visual spatial skills. Whereas the 2D linear sequential reading, writing, math type skills that so much of school is about, unfortunately, tend to come a little more challenged, because when you're wired for particular excellence, I think it's a continuum. When you're wired for excellence on one end of the continuum, it makes sense that the other end comes a little bit harder. Now, I'm actually the exact opposite. I'm much stronger at the 2D linear sequential. That stuff comes easy to me. The 3D visual spatial, it's a challenge for me. But most population is kind of in the middle of the road, and we have a little bit of relative strengths or weaknesses on any given skill.
Yeah.
But when you have a learning challenge, often there's really a trade-off, the flip side, that is actually the opposite side of the coin. The weakness is paired with the exceptional strength.
It's really interesting that you say that. I'm in the middle of a book by Malcolm Gladwell, David and Goliath. And he started a chapter with, no parent would wish dyslexia on their kid, or would they? And he actually explores what's possible, but also the reality of what's true in our culture, which is that the prison population is disproportionately dyslexic, because there's not a support system for them to explore how to manage the challenge with the flip side strength. And I do really like that term.
Yeah, totally. And it is unfortunately sad that the prison correlation, all of that is so directly connected with the learning challenges when they aren't addressed.
So that's why we're having this conversation, because if you have a child who is a struggling learner, the first step is to admit that you have a child who's struggling. This is the key to keeping, from my vernacular, this is the key for keeping your kid alive. Let's address it now before you end up having to talk them off a ledge. So, for me, there's a very direct correlation, as you pointed out, between the ability to see yourself as successful and your ability to build the buffer between yourself and the edge.
Sure. Yeah. And when you're in a system that all you see every day is how you don't measure up, once again, my friends talked about that assignment taking him 20 minutes. It took me an hour. My friend got an A on it when they're 20 minutes. I got a C after I put an hour of effort in. And sometimes, I don't believe that anybody is innately lazy. I think that we may resort to choosing laziness because it's easier psychologically to say I just didn't try than I tried so very hard and I just couldn't do it.
Ooh. Boy, that brings up a really, really big point. That I hadn't thought of, that a child might resort to laziness as a way to avoid the pain of failure.
Mm-hmm. So when we see a kid who's seeming like they're not trying anymore, like they've given up, it's usually because they've tried so hard without success. And we need to get them to the point. That's why I firmly believe that we need to back them down to where their just right level is, so that they can be gaining confidence and independence and success, because success breeds more success. It's a virtuous cycle. But unfortunately, the converse is also true, that, failure often leads to more failure. And we have to break that cycle. I mean, I am all about breaking the chains of failure, shame, and inadequacy, because I think that's what's truly needed And I mean, my tagline on my emails is freeing generations for greatness, because I think when we can break those chains, it's not, sometimes we're freeing the parent or the grandparent generation as they realize, oh, this was a part of my story, and recognize that it was a part of their story, and they can let that go. And it's like, oh, that wasn't something I need to be ashamed of. This was just something that wasn't understood at that time.
Yeah.
And also for the current child and their own story of success, but then on to their children, and the ripples of impact just go out. I mean, I truly believe that dyslexics are the world changers. They're born to be world changers because they see the world so differently. They have a unique perspective that those of us who don't are kind of sometimes stuck in our box, and we don't see the solutions. But if our dyslexic and other outside the box kids who do see the solutions give up on themselves, either academically and write themselves off,
Yeah.
or in a final way that they, choose suicide because it's just too painful to continue on, we lose the world changers and the problem solvers who are going to be the ones who solve the problems of our next generation.
I hear you. Now, how did you end up? I'm not going to brush that off. That was so pointed that we could be losing our creative yeast, if you will, in our thought, in our society, that we need them. They are incredibly valuable to the culture because they create change. They solve problems that are not necessarily solvable by a straight linear left brain or normal methodologies. So now that we know the problem, I've got a really question, because the solution, it sounds super simple. Just do the assessment, find out where your kid is, fill in some basic skill things, set them up for success. And I know that there's a lot of support available for that. And we're going to come back to that question. But first, how did you end up with a focus in dyslexia?
Well, I knew from that first philosophy education paper I wrote that I was going to need to start a school someday to personalize education. I didn't know who it was for at the time. Like, I really didn't. It was, as I was tutoring, well, okay, so in my infinite 20-year-old wisdom, I gave up my teaching job to gain broader experience so I could start the school someday. Well, I believe my divine placement agent closed every door for the next 3 years so that I'd be tutoring. I applied for every job within an hour of my home that I was qualified for, every teaching job for the next 3 years. And I would get down to sometimes it was like the last 2 candidates and then they closed the position or things like that. And I look back now and I think I recognize that I believe it's my divine placement agent. I would be happy. And there's several of those positions I would have been really good at. And I'd be happy. And I'd be making a difference for 25 kids each year. And I was being called to something bigger. There was something more that was, I was going to be able to be impacting far more than those 25 kids each year. And so he had to close the doors on me. Otherwise, I'd stay happy and content there. And so in the meantime, I tutored. And I've always been more word-oriented than math-oriented. So I started taking trainings around Fort Gillingham and Davis and National Institute of Learning Disabilities and other kinds of trainings around dyslexia. They're all dyslexia-oriented things.
Yeah, okay, thank you, because you're rattling off a bunch of names.
Sorry.
My ears don't hear as fast as you were speaking.
Sorry. So I'm guessing that anybody who's a parent whose child they know is dyslexic, some of those names are sounding familiar to them because there are things they've heard frequently. But I get it that you may not. So sorry, going too fast there. So anyhow, I started taking trainings that were, how do I help a kid with reading challenges? And those led me down the path towards dyslexia. And initially our school wasn't. So when I had that tiny brick and mortar school, it wasn't specific to dyslexia. It was just, it wasn't specific to anything at first. It was the people who were coming to me. And then it was more kids with learning challenges. And then as I switched online, I was being encouraged to think about, what's your niche that you best serve? And I was like, well, my expertise in my years of experience really is mostly with dyslexic kids. Let's go there. Let's target that. So yeah, I mean, so we've been specializing in dyslexia, I would say, for the last 6-7 years. That's been our specialty.
Wow.
Yeah. I wrote a book 4 years ago where I was pulling together some of the expertise from lots of other people. So my Dyslexia Outside the Box book, I wanted to take expertise of a lot of other people in the dyslexia field and bring it into parent-friendly language. And so they could read one book to summarize a lot of the stuff instead of having to wade through bunches of others.
Well,
So,
that's a very, very, very valuable thing, Beth Ellen, because as you said, the apple often doesn't fall far from a tree. So if there's a dyslexic child in the household, odds are that maybe the person trying to help them also has some reading challenges.
Yeah, I mean, so like when I wrote my book, I insisted with my publisher. I said I wanted 8.5 by 11 size so we could have more white space around the edges. I said I want a larger font size. I want more, white space on the page. We're going to do more bullet points than we might normally to help make things a little bit easier to digest. And like my original editor actually edited it. They didn't ask me who my audience was. They edited it for an academic audience. And then a friend read it. She's like, "This isn't your audience, Beth Ellen. Like, this isn't who this is for." And we reworked, we took it out of the pipeline, reworked the entire thing. And how can we say this easier? How can we say this simpler? How can we break this sentence down to make it more accessible? And I'm not saying dumbing it down in any way, but to make it accessible and realize that whether it's a teenage child themselves wanting to read a chapter about other inspirational people who've had dyslexia, or maybe mom's the one mainly helping with education, but dad would really, is curious about this and would love to read a couple chapters on it, even though reading's hard. Or grandma or grandpa, who, that was their challenge, is I'm curious, what is this thing that I'm hearing my grandchild has? So yeah.
So a guidebook, which is absolutely lovely. And I know you are really good at creating guides. And so I greatly appreciate the fact that you are giving your personalized learning guide system to everyone, because this is such a beautifully well laid out, easy to use, easy to get a handle on what could be causing my kid to struggle. And that brings up a point. I believe that every student struggles in something. Mm-hmm. That's part of the human condition. We are not normally hardwired to excel at everything.
No, because honestly, school is the only place in life where we expect everyone to be good at everything. In the real world, in the adult world, you don't choose a job that's in your weakness. Yes, you may have a couple things that are a little bit harder for you that you need to do as part of your day-to-day tasks or something. But if writing is really, really hard for you, you're probably not going to choose a career that requires writing copious amounts of reports. I mean, just realistically, and in school, we expect kids to be all these subjects and that they're supposed to be good at it all. And why don't you have straight A's? And well, you know what? Maybe it's okay if that handwriting was particularly hard for that child. And it wasn't okay in my world when I got a D in handwriting in 3rd grade. I mean, I was devastated because it was expected that I was going to be good at everything.
Oh,
yeah.
And those can create some psychic wounds.
Yeah, but I mean, that skill came hard for me. It was a longer, and I still type. If I want it to be read, I still need to type it. I can handwrite, but at the same time, it's still not my preferred mode of communication. I'm a published author, but handwriting was and is hard for me.
I was just thinking about this comment about school is the one place where we're in life that we're expected to excel at everything. I'm going, is there any other place? And my brain has gone off on this whole, the most sophisticated search engine in the world is the one that resides behind your eyes and between your ears. So mine is off going, I mean, college football players are supposed to get good grades. No, actually, that's not necessarily the way they anticipate it to be in college for a pro athlete, an athlete that's going to go pro. Yeah. And I'm going, wait a minute, is there any place other than this? And I'm like, well, the president, no, actually, he's surrounded by all of these other people who are supposed to be smarter than he is so that he can get the help and stay in his lane.
Mhm.
And I'm going, I can't find any other place in life where we are expected to be good at everything other than the internal, and I'm going to name it what it is, the internal bully. That for an entrepreneur, this is a big deal because
Sure.
solopreneurs force themselves into positions where they have to excel at everything in order for their, but it's like, wow, that's not pretty, Jackie. And I lived in that world for a really, really long time.
And I've been so grateful to be learning the lesson of who, not how. Who can I get to help me with this thing that I'm not, that I'm not as skilled with, so that I can really be, because I mean, as an entrepreneur, I certainly did that realm, where the CEO meant the chief everything officer, and now I'm functioning more as a true CEO, having a very capable team around me. But learning that who, not how, and quit trying to do the thing that you're not, like, why am I wasting time figuring out whatever it is? Why am I not finding somebody? And it doesn't have to be a full-time person, but like, especially for somebody who has some learning challenges of their own, if there's aspects, because I think, when actually statistics say that there's a Harvard Business School research study that said that 1/3 of entrepreneurs in the US are dyslexic. One in 6 in the population, overall, but so double that rate as entrepreneurs. It makes sense because entrepreneurs are out to solve a problem in a unique, creative way outside the system usually. And so it makes sense that somebody who's got that brain wiring, who is excellent for that. But I think it's important for all of us, that all of us are recognize that we aren't good at everything and we don't have to be. And you shouldn't try to be. You should be looking for support to help you in the areas that aren't your strengths.
This brings to mind the challenge of supporting the not good at everything so that not all the grades are A's, and a system that pulls all the grades together and averages them to get a GPA to decide whether you get a scholarship or whether you go to college, or there's a lot of things that are connected to it. And it's a system that maybe is ripe for change as we start to learn more about what it really means to excel, truly excel in some things, comes at the price of not excelling at other things.
And some of those other things we do need to invest. It may be that we need to spend extra time filling in those, it may not, that may not be something we naturally excel in, but most of my students, we have probably double the amount of reading, language arts, English type time in their schedule, because that's what they need to build skills so that they have the functional skills for life.
Yeah.
And so there's a balance of, I'm not going to just ignore it. Yes, I want to embrace strengths, but we also need to build in the plan where they are and getting them successful so we can at least have 8th grade skills to be, functional in society.
Yeah. And that's a big deal. It really, really is, because this is the realm when you're dealing with a struggling learner. This is the realm of, you can't ignore it. Without these basic skills, we're setting our children up to fail at life. And the struggle around it is really a challenging one. I've had my own struggles with it this year with all of the schools being closed. And it's, not for me personally, because I'm out of school age, but, I have members of my family that are school age, and I've seen these struggles. And it's heartbreaking when you know that there's a problem and you haven't found a successful way to address it.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that you're giving everybody a path, a place they can start to address it if they have a struggling learner. So bless you, Beth Ellen, for what you are doing out in the world. And Katie, go ahead and let everybody have the gift, because I want people to be able to have time to just click on it, go look at it. If you've got questions, pop them into the chat. And Beth Ellen, I know you're part of the VIP lounge where the speakers get to interact with people who have claimed being a very inspiring person. So I really appreciate that. And for people watching the recording, if they want to get the guide, it's in the show notes. So we're not leaving you out.
In that personalized learning guide, you're actually going to be filling out a questionnaire about your kid, and we are going to generate that guide. It auto generates for you based on what you said. So even in that guide, and you've actually got excerpts from my book that are linked for you that are specific to your concern. So if you've got something that's if you tell me you've got concerns about phonics or about auditory processing, you're going to have a link to an excerpt about different aspects of what you specifically expressed concern about for your kid, to give you a very personalized guide and a path forward to take some action steps for your kid.
Oh, that is such a beautiful, beautiful gift. Beth Ellen, in a world where struggle is sometimes considered noble, should we address that elephant? Is there any value in letting kids struggle?
I don't really think so. To be honest, I mean, I don't really think so, because I think there's okay, let me balance that. Let me check.
Yeah,
there's a place to not swoop in and be the helicopter parent and try to rescue them. I think that's important, that we're not trying to rescue them from the journey of the path of learning the skills. But I think as long as we're equipping them on the journey with a place they can be successful, that we need to be meeting them where they are so that we can set them up for that confidence and independence and success.
So things being difficult is not bad.
No, hard isn't bad. It's not that something being difficult isn't bad, but when it's beyond doable.
Yeah, when it
needs to be doable.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, a doable level of challenge. That's why we call our just right level, because it's like one of those, they need to be working at a level that they can do. If they're being asked to do something that's just setting them up for, it's a total recipe for failure. There's no way they don't have the skills to achieve it. We're not helping them. I mean, we're not helping.
Yeah. So defining struggle was really important for me.
Mm-hmm.
As I was asking the question, I'm going, it's really about the definition.
Yeah.
Because
being a challenge is a good thing. Like,
yeah.
we try, when we use adaptive programs that are going to keep the student at a continual level where they're just being challenged just beyond where they are ready right now. That's important. But we want it to be a challenge that's a doable challenge, not a challenge that's like we talked about earlier, trying to keep your head above water and feeling like you're about to drown.
Yeah. There we go. The difference between challenge and struggle.
Yeah. Is it swimming? Is it a hard swim? Are we swimming hard and making progress? Or are we desperately paddling, treading to just not sink?
Yeah. The important distinctions,
mm-hmm.
Really, really important distinctions. And I want to just say thank you again for all that you are doing to change the conversation around struggling learners.
Mm-hmm.
And around this, normalizing the conversation that dyslexic does not mean disabled.
No.
And I think that was for me a big deal. In my family, it was, my mom was a special ed supervisor. Mm. And so because the language of the day was very, damaging. It was very, I started to say damning, and I can, it's my show. Okay. It really made the kids think that there was something broken in them. And now we've come really far from that. But when it comes to having a diagnosis of dyslexia, it's the same kind of challenge that for many people, that means damaged, disabled.
Well, and it's interesting. And I have parents say, well, I don't know if I want to tell them they've got this diagnosis. And I tell them, honestly, what they've diagnosed themselves with is far worse than whatever it is the reality is. And that, I mean, they see you talking hush hush behind your hand to Aunt Susie, and those things, and they know something. They know things are coming harder for them than others.
Yeah.
And again, they think, what's wrong with me? They already know something's wrong. And I had one little boy. I was at a conference. I was giving a talk, and I was giving my Help and Hope for Dyslexics talk, I think it was. And afterwards I said, hey, what did you think? And he's like, I think I'm dyslexic. And he saw himself in those flip side strengths and challenges, as well as both the challenges and the strengths I had described. And he finally had a name for it. He's probably 8 years old. And for him, it was not at all, and his mom told me, he's like, honestly, I'd never even considered it until about 10 minutes before your talk. Another vendor was like, do you think it could be dyslexia? And she looked at the program and saw that my talk was next, and they came, and she's like, and he was just like, I've got a name for it. And it was just so empowering to him. So I think that not moving towards it with language, and if you explore to find out some of the amazing dyslexics that are out there.
Oh, yeah. It was amazing to, like I said, I just was in that part of the book, David and Goliath, and it's a beautiful shining light on where the power is. And one of the other interviews I did on parenting with, and it's up on the Suicide Prevention Movement YouTube channel, was with TC Clark. And for her son, who had extreme ADHD, she told him it was his superpower and explained it that way to him. She said, what would it be like if Superman couldn't control his strength? I mean, he'd be walking through ripping doors off. There's nothing wrong with you. You have to learn to control your superpower the same way as Clark Kent did. Yeah. And that was, an analogy that could resonate in a kid brain because he knew who they were. Yeah. Mm-hmm. For those of us that have, for those of us that have the desire to share the stories of the people who succeed with the conditions, the ways of viewing the world that we call dyslexia, I recommend, if you're going to be talking to your kid, choose an age-appropriate example. Sure. Because they're not going to know who some of these people are.
But at the same time, if you talk about Thomas Edison, they've probably heard of him, and they've heard that he did something pretty amazing. Or, you talk about Nikola Tesla and the person who helped discover a bunch of cool things we know about electricity, like, or Henry Winkler or Oprah or Richard Branson. They may have heard of some of these people. And if they didn't, you could explore their stories together and find out what cool things did some of these, Charles Schwab, hello, the people who have been successful with the dyslexic brain wiring are pretty inspiring.
Yeah, you're right. Okay. And since I'm standing up, that is an appropriate way to say that. Okay. So the good news is there are ways to set your struggling learner up for success. There are ways to help your child at any level succeed more. And there are ways to help you and me succeed in the role of being a parent and a grandparent, aunt, uncle, brother, sister, whatever role you have. And Beth Ellen, thank you so much for taking us on this journey so that there's some hope. And I love that you have a talk, Hope and Help for I should have known. Okay. So I recommend everyone start with the guide. And thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thanks for having me, Jackie. I appreciate the opportunity to share with your audience.
You're welcome. Mwah.